All right, we're recording this office hour. In this office hour, we're going to talk about functions and how we would walk through some of this. This actually comes from your web fundamentals. I just took one of the assignments from JavaScript and we're going to do it in Python. So if you want more to practice, just remember that web fundamentals, you still have access to that. There are some, I think this is, I can't remember which assignment this is, but it's one of the assignments. So we're going to take that and we're just going to walk through how I would do it and what it looks like in Python. All right. So this first one says given an array. Now this is usually a keyword. And what I usually, if I ever teach web fundamentals, this is what I will always tell my students is this given an array is a keyword to say that we are going to have a function that takes in an array, right? It has to have a parameter of an array, right? Given an array or takes in an array or accepts an array. Those are keywords to say your function is going to take in, it's going to have a parameter that's going to be an array. So that's just something that to note as you're reading it. When you read that, that's what that says. Then it says, write a function that changes all positive integers in the array to the string big, blah, 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 returns that same array, change to, okay. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a function that checks all the numbers. And if the number is positive, then we want to change that value to the string of big. And if it's negative, we want to keep it. So there's this thing called pseudocode. And so pseudocode, P-S-E-U-D-O code is solving the problem first by, instead of like, so instead of us actually going and trying to do the code, let's just do like by sentences of what we have to do, right? So here, I know that it says given an array, write a function. So my first step, so I need to create a function that takes in an array. That's it, right? That's my first step. I can't do anything here without doing that first step. Awesome. Now, if I'm looking at it, I've got a couple things I have to do, right? It changes all positive numbers in the array to a string. Does anybody know what my next step would be? So I'll create this function that we're going to call biggie size. It takes in an array. What is my next step?
If statement.
An if statement. Okay. So
wouldn't you have to check the values of the array? I mean, if you're using pseudocode, right? So you would, instead of writing it, you would just say check values in an array.
Yeah. So my if statement to check if values are positive, right? So then I'm going to say something like if positive, change to big. And then maybe something, right? I'm just thinking through if negative, keep negative number. Right. And the idea behind this too is whenever we have a technical interview, you're going to get something. Now it's not going to be as simplistic as this, just transparent, right? It'll be a little bit harder oftentimes. And there's some ones that we can go through, and throughout the course, I'll introduce a little bit harder and harder ones. But what we're going to do is this, you're going to pseudocode, right? You're going to have a whiteboard. That's why they call it a whiteboard, like a whiteboard interview. And so what they're going to want you to do, and they're going to want to see how you think through the problem, right? And so that's where pseudocode can come in great, right? You don't have to, in order to get a job, you don't have to get the answer right, right? Like if there's a whiteboard interview and you actually get it wrong, but you show them your thought process, you show them that you think of edge cases, that you think of things that, just the way that you think, and they say, hey, although you didn't get the correct answer, the way you came about it was awesome. And I love your creativity with your thinking. That can still get you a job. So just know that this technical interview aspect is not, they don't want somebody who's just going to sit there, write down on a piece of paper, it's silent for 45 minutes, and then you say, here's the code, right? They want you to see how you interact, how you think through things, how you play off. Sometimes they'll play off with you. You can ask like, is there an edge case? And then from there, they can say yes or no, because they also want to see, are you a team player, right? Can you articulate what you're thinking? Because in tech, oftentimes there are people who are very, very, very smart, but have very little social skills. right? So they can do a bunch of code, like a 10x coder can code way better than I ever will, but they can't articulate and teach somebody, right? And say, well, this is what I'm doing, or here's what I'm thinking. They just are going to go and do it. So just know with a technical interview, the pseudocode piece does a lot for you. It's not just, oh, once you get advanced, don't pseudocode. No, your companies are going to be teaching or looking for a ton of different things from that. So just know that as we pseudocode and we think through that, we're trying to accomplish that as well. Okay, so we know we have an if statement to check if values are positive. We know what we're doing, if they're positive or negative. What else do I have to do? If I'm just reading this, right? Given an array, done that. Checks all positive integers. Okay. And then return same array. So then I'm just going to return array. Does anybody else see one other step I do have to do here? We're just pseudocoding it.
Kevin mentioned it in chat. It's the for loop. You got to go before everything and make sure to iterate through it.
Yeah, way to go. I am checking, but if I know that I have to check, right? Changes all positive integers in the array to the string big. We don't know how many positive integers there are or where they're at located, right? From an index perspective. So that means I have to do a loop. So before my even if statement, I'm going to say for loop to go through array. Perfect. Okay, my pseudocode looks good. Now let's go ahead and build this. And we're just going to go step by step. So create a function that takes an array. I'm going to say def big E size. It takes in something. I'm just going to call it R. Okay. So now this step complete. Next step, for loop through the array. So I'm going to say for I in range. And I'm going to do len of R, right? Because I want to go through the entire array. Then what
Just
do
a
I
heads
want?
up, you misspelled range. Just a heads up.
Thanks. I have fat
Gotcha.
fingers.
It's
Thank
all-
you.
Hey, same. I
Okay.
type for a living too.
Yeah, same. It's the worst. Okay. So now what I'm doing is I am going and iterating through my entire array. What are we doing here? Now what's next? Anybody know? Any ideas? We've done this step. We're iterating through. What's the next here?
Yeah, you want to check if it's a positive value or negative value.
Yeah. If array of I is greater than 0, right? If it's positive, then what do I want to do? Say array of I equals big. So what we're doing is we're checking saying if it is positive, it's greater than 0. I'm going to do greater than or equal to 0 just because is 0 positive? It's not negative. I
Yeah.
don't know. Now let's leave out 0. Forget it. Okay. So if the value is greater than 0, meaning it's positive, then we're going to change it to big. Okay. Do I need an else here?
Nope.
No, you don't. Why not?
Should just ignore and leave the negative numbers. Doesn't need to
Yeah,
do
'cause if
anything to them.
Exactly. If I had an else, meaning that it's smaller, then I'm just going to say array of I equals array of I, right? And that we don't need to do that. Would this work? Sure. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. So, okay, perfect. So we're iterating through. We've said if it's greater than 0, we're going to change it to big. We decided we don't need an else. Now, what's the last thing I need to do?
Return statement.
Yeah, where do I put that, Dennis? Do I put it right here?
Yeah, no, do one more back tab.
Perfect.
There you go.
What would happen if I would have put it right here?
It's gonna end the loop and therefore end the function as well.
Yeah, it's going to end it after
Exit
the
out.
first iteration, right? Because it's indented, code blocked within this, it's going to go through the first iteration. It's going to hit this code and then it's going to be done. So we got to make sure our return is in the correct spot and we're just going to return array. Cool. So let's go ahead and test this. Let's say I've got some array, some R that equals 1, -4, 8, -9, 0, 10. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to print. Now, the reason I have to print is because although my function returns my array, it's not going to show anything, right? So if I want to actually see the value of array, I have to print it. But I'm going to print big E size, and it takes in some array. So from here, perfect. Let's open my terminal. Python 3 p sorry, function. I'll name this. Why should I just call this practice dot py. Okay, so we see 1 is a positive number. It went to big. -4, obviously not. Big 9, 0 didn't do anything because 0 is not greater than 0. 0 is equal to, right? So it just stayed the same, something to note. And big because 10. Now with this 0, that would be a great question to ask the recruiter, right? If you're in a technical interview, you would say, hey, would you like me to assume 0 is positive, or is there something else you would like me to do if it's 0? Just asking those questions just shows that you're thinking through things, right? And so maybe they said, well, if it's 0, I want you to write smalls. Well, then that's something else that we can check for, right? That's just a good kind of question, follow-up question to show. But we see that this now works. Any questions on this one? They get progressively harder. No, pretty simple. Cool. Now let's go to this next one. Create a function that takes in an array of numbers. The function should print the lowest value in the array and return the highest value in the array. Okay. So pseudocode wise, Dennis, what's my first step?
You are going to define a function and pass it in an array, or create a function.
Yeah.
Pass it in an array.
Perfect. Cole, what's my next step?
Just reading here. It. This one kills me.
Oh, you're good. It's okay. Let's think about it, right? So we've already done this part. Now it's saying the function should print the lowest value in the array and returns the highest value. What does that tell me that I have to do? If I'm looking for the lowest and the highest, means I've got to
Like-
go through the entire array, right? I got to find the
Right,
lowest
so-
and highest. So what
so
would I
we're gonna-
use to go through that?
That's when we're gonna iterate through the array, right?
Yeah,
Kinda
what
like
do
what
I
we did
use to
earlier.
iterate? Yeah, what do I use to
Um,
iterate?
Short-term memory, man. Use thank you. Fill the loop. There it is.
Yeah. Anytime, and this is why I just really want to hammer this down. Anytime we need to check every value, we're going to do a for loop, right? If we're doing a repetitive process, we are doing a for loop. Okay. Ethan, what am I doing next? So I'm iterating through. Then what am I going to do? I'm checking to see if something's the lowest value in the array and the highest value in the array.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think. We did something similar to this last week, right? It's kind of like a bubble sort methodology. I'm just trying to think what we did last week that was similar.
Okay.
Monday or last week. I guess so you obviously have to have some kind of an if statement that exists here. And the if statement would hold the first item in the array, right? And compare it to item +1, and then adjust depending upon the outcome of that. So I think it's probably gonna have to sort the numbers of it inevitably, right? Like I think the only way to do it is to compare the numbers and sort it, right?
There's another way we can do it, but that is one way you can do it. Let's just it without having to sort. What if we just went through and we checked to see
Max, is
if
there
a
a max
number, yeah,
function?
if number is lower, if whatever array at position I, if that's lower or higher than my current low and current high, but I don't have a current low or current high, right? So maybe we missed a step.
Well, yeah, you can set, two variables that exist called low and high and set them to 0 to start, so you have a baseline.
Yeah. Why am I doing that before my for loop? Anybody remember?
Global variable.
Because it's gonna iterate, if you include them within the for loop, it's gonna iterate every time.
Yeah.
And reset the value of each, basically, or change it.
Yeah, exactly, right? If I do it within my for loop. If I do it within my for loop, then every single time my for loop goes to the next reiteration, it's going to redefine low and high, right? So I have to make sure I do it outside my for loop. Okay. So now we're checking if array index I is low, or lower than low. And then I also need another one, right? Says, is it higher than high? Now, obviously, if it is lower than my lowest, are we going to have in check to see if it's higher than my high?
No, unnecessary.
No, right? So we'll make sure that those are two different. We're not going to have like an elif, because if it's one of them, it's not going to be, or we are going to have that, but yeah, we'll talk about that. We're not going to do two checks. Okay. So we're doing that. Then at the end of this, what it does is once my for loop is done, I need to print my low and return high. Okay. So let's build this out. So I'm creating a function that takes in an array. I'm going to call this low high. Cool. It takes in an array. We've done that. Perfect. Now we talked about we need to create our variables. There's a couple of ways I can do this. What would happen if I just did this? Low equals 0. Is that going to work?
It should work.
Should work. What happens if I get a array that looks like this?
If you have an array with a single value, or a negative value, yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's not going to work, right? Because low will always be higher.
Correct.
Yeah.
Could you put
So
less
we don't
than
want
or
to
equal
start
to
at
0?
0. So what's a what? I'm sorry.
I was sorry. I was just saying, could you put less than or equal to 0 if you were expecting all negative numbers?
Yeah, well, what's a way that we could create this to where it can work and we don't have to have any sort of condition on if it's negative or positive? There's a creative way we can do
Array of I.
set it. Array,
Yeah, array of I.
0.
array
Wouldn't it
of
be
well,
0?
not array of
You're gonna
I,
start
but
the
it'd be
first
array of
value.
0. Yeah.
Thank
Right. I can set it equal to my first position because I know that my low is within my array. Right. And so I can set it to the first position, and either that first position is my low, or we're going to do some sort of conditional statement and we're going to check it against another number within my array. So I can set them actually both to array of 0. I'm just gonna get rid of that. Now let's do something here. For I in range, I'm going to start. Do I need to start at 0?
No.
No, I don't. Right. I need to start at 1 because I already have this value. So if I start at 0, it's going to do an extra iteration and it's going to check if array of 0 is greater than or lower than array of 0. And that's just a waste of time. So let's do len of R. Perfect. Now, what do we want to do here? What's my next step?
If low is less than array of I.
Necessarily less than, but what about if low is greater than? What if my current low is greater than my array of I? Meaning array of I is less than. You could have done that either way, right? If array of I is less than low, do something. Or if low is greater than array of I, meaning array of I is lower than my current low.
Correct.
Then what I want is low equals array of I. Right? Now, what I was talking about is I don't need to say something like this. I don't need to have this if check, right? In the sense of if I have these two different if checks, then what's going to happen is even if it's my lowest, it's then going to check it, right? And that's, again, a wasted computation. So I can just do an elif. Because, and talking about chaining methods, and remember we talked about once one condition is true, it doesn't read the other condition. Well, we don't want it to read this condition if this condition is true, right? It is what it is. If something's the lowest, that already tells us that there's something else higher. Therefore, that is not also going to be my high. So what I can say is if high or elif high is less than array of I, then I'm going to say high equals array of I. Then once my for loop is done, so meaning I'm on the same code block, right? Same indentation pattern as my for loop. That means my for loop is done, right? Because it's going to check all of these. Once my for loop is done, then I'm going to print my low. And then I'm going to return high. So this is going to iterate through. Then it's going to check to see if my low is greater than I or array of I. If that is the case, then I have a new low. It's also, if this condition is not true, then it's going to check, well, is my high less than the current value at this index? If it is less than, well, then the current value at that index is now my new high. So I set that to high. Once the for loop is done, it's going to print my low and return high. Cool. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's say we've got, let's just take this value again. And then let's go ahead and say print, because I want to see the high. Low, high, that takes in some R. Perfect. Now I save this, clear this out. I run it. My low is -9. That's what printed. I'm going to say something like this. F. That way I can make sure if I run this, the low is -9 and then it returns to me 10. And if I'm looking here, 10 is my highest number. So this does work. And again, this is an F string. So by me putting this F in front of my string, it allows me to call on this variable within my string. So that way this low, which is -9, comes out, the low is -9. Any questions on this one?
Can we also put a string, same like for print for the high, like without, we will just not put the parentheses, right? The return.
Let's see. See, the high is, let's see if this works. I'm not sure that this is going to, it should, because it should just replace the value. Let's see if this works. Yep. The low is -9. And if I wanted to say the high is, again, I can use my F string. And then what this does is it sees this function call, runs it. And remember, whatever my function returns becomes the value of the function call. So then it's returning the high. So that kind of goes into, like it says, high. Then all of a sudden, high is that how you spell high? Did I spell it incorrectly?
It's one of those days, huh? Yeah, that's, you spun it right, I think.
What? Interesting. Sorry, I just looked at it and I was like, that does not look right. How embarrassing. Okay. So
Go
yeah,
through
I
that
can.
daily, probably twice.
Yeah.
You look at the same word over and over again, it's gonna not make sense anymore.
Yeah. Cool. Great. We've got 30 more minutes, so we're crushing it. Any questions on this guy?
Might be worth going over. Obviously, you could do this maybe at the end too if you don't want it to drag out. But we were having a back and forth in chat on basically the concept of saying, okay, for X in list versus for X in range of the length of list and what the functional differences of that are.
Yeah.
We generally cleared it in chat, but just to make sure everyone fully gets it.
Yeah. Why don't we go through that at the end? For sure. We can kind of
Perfect,
just
yeah.
walk through and do some examples. My always encouragement is if you don't know, right, like why are we using range versus like for X and list, play with it, right? You don't have to know every single nuance of the language. And if you play with it, then you can all of a sudden be like, oh, this does work or this doesn't work. Oh, this is interesting. This comes out as, you know, whatever. So, yeah, my encouragement would be play with stuff, see if it works. If it works, great. But yeah, we can go through that, kind of mess with it towards the end of this class. Thanks, Peter. There's add 1 to every other element, specifically those whose index is odd. Afterward. Okay, so we got a couple. We can do this one. I do definitely want to do this reverse array. Okay. We're going to do these two, and then we're going to do one at the end called foobar. And it's just a popular interview question that we're going to do. So we'll do those. That's going to be, hopefully we can do these in the next couple of minutes. I might go a little bit quicker, but in office hour especially, please feel free. If I'm going too quick or if you have a question, just go ahead and unmute, and then we can, if you're, go ahead and unmute and we can kind of talk through this. Okay. So I'm going to pseudocode this. It says given an array of numbers again. So I'm going to create a function that takes in an array. Perfect. Add 1 to every other element, specifically those whose index is odd. Okay, so array I of 1, blah, 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 blah. Okay, afterward, console log. So what I have to do here is I have to for loop through my list. Sorry, I said array. These are lists. Anytime it says R, this is for JavaScript. It's a list in Python. Okay, for loop through my list. Then what I want to do is when I'm using this I in range, what I can do is that actually is just an index number, right? It's not the actual value. So even speaking about, should I use for I in range or, for I in my list, this will be one that's important because what we first care about is the actual index number itself, specifically the ones who are odd. So I will use range in this one. This is a definitive case where I will use that. So I'm going to for loop through my list, and then I'm going to check if index is odd or even. Okay. Then I'm going to say something like this. If odd, add 1 to array list of I, else console log each, afterward console log each value. Then I'm going to print list of I, and then return list. I'm not sure why they're. So add 1 to every other element, specifically those whose index. Afterward, console log each array value and return array. Okay. Again, it's a list. I just took this from a JavaScript thing, but these are lists. Lists and arrays are the same thing, just different names because different language. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm going to call this increment. It takes in some list. Perfect. Now I need to iterate through. And like I said, I'm going to say for I in range. I'm going to start at 0. And then I'm going to do the length of some list. Right. So that way I can go through my entire list. Then what I want to do is I want to say if I modulo 2 equals 1, meaning that it's odd, then what I want to do is I want to say array of I plus equals 1. I'm adding 1 to that. Perfect. Now I'm not doing anything if it is even. So then I'm just going to say print array. I didn't call it array. Some list of I. Some list of I. So it's going to print it no matter what, even if it's not, right? It's going to print it always. And then at the end, I'm going to return some list. Perfect. So walking through what I did, I created this function called increment that takes in some list. Then I'm going to increment through, I'm going to iterate through using a for loop. And the reason I'm using range here specifically is because I care about this index value. I don't care about, well, I do care about what's actually at the index in some list, but particularly I care about what the index is, because if the index is 1, then that tells me it's odd and I want to go ahead and manipulate my data, right? Then no matter what, whether it's odd or even, I'm going to print that value and then I'm going to return some list. So let's just do this. Oops. Use this guy again. Cool. So then I'm going to print increment.
Will,
Yeah.
Will, are you gonna
Yeah.
have a tail case? Are you gonna have a tail case issue in here also for the first item for number 1?
It should. I think 1 modulo 2 still returns 1 as a remainder.
Oh, does it? Oh,
I
okay.
believe so. So let's try it. Yep. No. Oh, yeah. So at position 0, which is 1, it just printed 1. Then at position 1, it added 1. So now it's -3 because -4 plus 1 is -3, obviously. 8 stayed the same. Same thing happened here. 0 stayed the same, and then 11. And then my new value is 1, -3, 8, -8, 0, and 11. Any questions on this guy? Peter, you said 0 modulo 2 is what I think he was going for.
Yeah, for Ethan, I think that's what he was asking about, I think.
Oh, yeah. 0
that's all,
and
but yeah.
1 just return that value of 0 and 1.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why even 0 didn't change. Great questions. Any other questions on this guy? Do you guys understand this?
Okay, so one quick question. Did the
Yeah.
first if statement you created with the modulo, I'm pretty sure is what it's called,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So is the length some list, is that what makes it divide the index and not the actual numbers in the array?
Yeah, because I'm doing length of some list, or particularly because I'm doing range. Remember, range just is a for loop for numbers, right?
Fine.
And so this length of some list is a built-in, some built-in functionality in Python that returns the length of my list. So in this case, my list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this will length of some list will give me 6. So it's like I'm saying this, right? I want you to go from 0 to 6. I want you to start at 0. So I is going to start at 0, and then it's going to increment up. That's what's happening here. Then I'm saying, okay, I starts at 0. And because I'm using range, it's just 0 through whatever my end condition is, right? If it's 100, then it's going to go 0 through 100. If it's going to go you know, through 50, whatever. And so this is just my index, my list index position. So if I'm here, I've got my list right here. Let's say I've got 1, 7, or 6, 7, 3. I represents the 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Just the index position of my list. That's why if I want the actual value here, this 1, I have to say sum list at position I. So what it's saying is go into my list, sum list, at the position that whatever I currently is. So the first one is 0, right? So at sum list position 0, I want you to print that value when I is 0. When I increments up to 1, obviously, then it continues. Sum list at position 1 is right here, right? And so on and so forth. It goes every single one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if you were to take away range, would it then just like divide it by what's in the array? Because I'm confused. Is it actually dividing like the index position or the exact number in the array?
The index position.
Okay,
This
so if you were to take out range,
len of sum list, when it runs this, its value is 6. So this is like I'm saying for I in range 0, 6. Right? And if I really wanted to get there and it increments by 1, right? That's what it's doing. I just represents the index position in range. Starts at 0, increments all the way up to 6, increments by 1. So I'm taking the actual index itself of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? The actual index itself, and I'm saying, is this number odd or even? If it's odd, then I do something with it. And if it's not, well, then I just print it. Does that make more sense?
yeah, I got it.
Cool. Great questions. Any other questions, my friends? Somebody asked where these are coming from. These are coming from your Learn Web Fundamentals Part-Time Online Basic Foundation. I'm just doing these ones just in Python. But that's where you can come back and do the same things in Python. Just that's what this is coming from. In the JavaScript section, Basic Foundation 2, it's an optional assignment. If you want more practice, absolutely go through and do that. Cool.
Is there a
Any other-
place like online or somewhere for finding out a remainder for a modulo?
What do you mean?
So, because you're saying like, okay, if I modulo 2 and there's going to be a remainder, basically like whatever's divided by 2, we want to find if there's a remainder of 1, right?
Yeah,
Or am
for
I
an odd.
misunderstanding that? Okay.
Anything modulo 2 is going to return either 0 or 1. If
Okay.
it's even, it's going to return 0. And if it's odd, it's going to return 1.
I guess I'm just having trouble trying to figure out like, how do I know what the remainder is going to be?
Yeah, so in this one, it's just 0 or 1 for 2. Let's say something like this. Let's say I wanted to do modulo 3, right? I wanted multiples of 3. Actually, let's go ahead and do FizzBuzz right now. And then we can walk through how do we do that. Yeah. We're going to do one called FizzBuzz. Basically, iterate. I'm going to create a function that takes in an array. This iterate through array list, sorry, Python. And if number is multiple of 3, print or replace the value with fizz. The multiple if the number is a multiple of 5, replace the value with buzz. And if the number is a multiple of 15, replace the value with fizz buzz. This is a very common question, fizz buzz. Very common question. Cool. And so we're going to see how we're going to use the modulo 3, 5, and 15 here. Okay. So here, if I'm doing this, I'm creating a function that takes in an array list. Iterate through the list. And if the number is a multiple of 3, replace the value with fizz. If the number is a multiple of 5, replace the value of buzz. And if the number is a multiple of, well, it's 3 and 5, replace the value with fizz buzz. Okay. So first I'm going to create a function that takes in a list. Perfect. Now, what do I need to do here? I need to iterate through, right? I need to check to see if it's a multiple. So iterate through. See if it is a multiple of 3. If so, replace with fizz. If that's that, and buzz. And then I'm going to say of 3 and 5, replace with fizz buzz. Okay. And then I'm just going to say return list. Cool. All right. So what we're doing is we're creating a function. We're going to iterate through. So use for loop to iterate. And then I'm going to see, is it a multiple of 3? If so, I want to replace it with fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, I want to replace it with buzz. And if it's a multiple of 3 and 5, I want to replace it with fizz buzz. All right. So let's call this def fizz buzz. Takes in a list. Some list. All right. Now we talked about this a little bit in class. And we talked about this specifically when we did if statements, and we talked about conditional methods or conditional statements. Does anybody remember what a big rule is with conditional statements? Anybody see what I have to do first here?
Yeah, you got to make sure they go in a certain order if there's overlapping conditions.
Yeah, exactly, right? I've got a bunch of conditions here to where it is, if it's a multiple of 3, hit fizz, multiple of 5, hit buzz. If it's multiple of both, then I'm supposed to do 3 fizz and buzz. But what is my most unique one here? Anybody have a guess? Ethan, you got to guess. What's my most unique condition here?
I mean, without thinking about it, I'd probably just start with the 15. Sorry, the 3 and 5 first.
Yeah, exactly, right. And you're exactly right, because if we think about it, this condition 3 and 5 will never run if it's behind these two. because obviously 3, they're the same, right? If it's a multiple of 3, multiple of 3, multiple of 5, multiple of 5. So if the number's 3, multiple of 3 or 5, if it's at the end, once one of these conditions, again, once one of these conditions is made true, that's the end of my chain, right? It's the end of my if statement. So I have to make sure that that one is first. Len of some list. Cool. So now I'm iterating through. And then I'm going to say if. Now we want to check the number, not the specific index position, right? So I'm going to say some list of I modulo 3 equals 0. Now what this is saying is if whatever the value being passed through. Oh, I don't even need to take in the list. It's 0 to 20. Sorry. This is supposed to be create a function from 0 to 20, from the number 0 to 20. So what we're doing here is we're saying, oh, let's go back. I like the other way. Let's take in some list. Because I've already built out other stuff. Okay. So if at my position of index I, so in this case, 0. So if the first number in my list, if modulo 3 equals 0, meaning 3 goes into it evenly. This in this case would be 3, right? 3 goes into 3 and there's no remainder. 3 goes into 4 one time, but we still have a remainder of 1, right? And so that's how modulo works. If I have different numbers, it's just sort of division, right? With a remainder, how much is remaining? Does it go in evenly or is there a remainder? And that's what this modulo 3 is doing. So when I say if some list modulo 3 equals 0 and some list modulo I, or some list of I modulo 5, 0, this is saying both conditions, right? If both conditions are true, which is that 15, like Ethan said, then I want to say some list at position I equals FizzBuzz elif and this one is kind of up to you on how you do this. If you want 3 before 5 or 5 before 3, that's going to be something that does change. So like when with the number of, oh no, yeah, because duh. So now if I say some list position I modulo 3 equals 0, then some list of I equals, I think I said fizz. And then I can actually do this. Do the same thing with 5. The way I did that, I'm on a Mac. You just do shift option. So like if I want to make something multiple, I do shift option down and that'll just recreate it. And if I want to move something, so let's say I wanted this buzz to go up, you just do option up, I think alt on a Windows, and that's how you move it up and down if you wanted to. So it's just some keyboard shortcuts for you. Okay, cool.
I have a question, sorry.
Yeah.
So can we also do for the line row 86, right? Since if you multiply 3 and 5, it's 15, right?
Mhm.
Can we also go that way? Like, okay, if something is divided by 15, like make it very simple instead of saying 3 by 5. I don't know how it will look like. Okay, 15 is divided by 15, right? 30 works, 5 works, and all these numbers work both for 3 and 5. To make it simple, like I was just thinking. What do you think?
No, I'm with you. I'm trying to think of if there's a number that isn't 15 with 3 and 5. In theory, yes. I just do 3 and 5 because that's what this actually asks, right?
Okay.
And so like, yeah, because this and FizzBuzz is a very, very, very popular like question that like in the industry, a lot of people anybody who's a developer will know what FizzBuzz is. And so with this, it's a multiple of 3 and 5. And so because the question asks that, that's why you do 3 and 5. But I think in theory, you could just do modulo 15 and then it'd be the same. I just don't know if there's a number. I can't think of a number off the top of my head. Maybe, if you guys have a number, maybe that works,
Yeah, I think 115 is the number which will not work with 3. I think so. It's divided by 5, but not by 3. 115.
Okay. See there. Cool.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, you're good. Well, no, because I'm even thinking. Yeah,
we just try
even
it?
15, because it would go 90 and then 105 and then 120. Yeah, exactly.
And then
right?
105 goes by 3 and 5 both.
3 and 5. Okay. Interesting. I don't know. Maybe there's a number, but because it was read like this, that's why you would just do both.
Okay, thanks.
And that, again, no, great question, and way to even try to make it lower. I would say this is a good fail safe, just in case there is some odd number. I don't think there is, but in case there is some odd number that, you're kind of not thinking about it.
One
Then-
thing I also learned, if the question is specifically asking for some specific things, we want to stick with that, right?
Yeah.
Even though if we see something, we can come up with a second solution, but not, at least we should have the way they are asking, right?
Yeah, you want it to work at the beginning and then you work from there, right? And you can modularize and test it from there, right? So you want this to work. Okay, this works great. You create some test case, and then all of a sudden it gets, I want to modularize it. And maybe I try 15 and I give it my test cases, and then it works. And it's like, okay, great, this code works. And now it's less code. But yeah, getting it to work first is super important.
Okay, good.
Perfect. So then here, all I'm doing is at the end of this, I am return some list. And so now I just need to create fizz equals, and then the way it works is you go 0. Okay. Perfect. So we are iterating through. We have this function called SumList. We are iterating through SumList. Then we're saying, well, if it's modulo 3 and 5, so if we're just looking at this 15 should say FizzBuzz. SumList. Then we change that value. If it is modulo 3, should say Fizz. Modulo 5 should say Buzz. Then we return. So let's go ahead and try this. Print FizzBuzz. That takes in Fizz. Save that. Make sure nothing else is printing. Get rid of this. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna clear this. And let's see what we got. Oh. So something that's interesting to note is here, it
That's
printed
0.
FizzBuzz because remember modulo 3, 0 modulo anything is going to do 0. So I think it was supposed to be 1 from 20. I'm trying to remember it. I think it is 1 from 20. Yeah. That way it's 0, 1, 2, Fizz, Buzz, Fizz, Fizz, Buzz, Fizz, Fizz, Buzz, Fizz, and Buzz. So it does work. So you started at 1. Because you either, yeah, I think it was the numbers 1 through 20. Can't remember. But any questions on this using your different modulo numbers, remembering that if chaining method, if one of these conditions becomes true, it doesn't read the other ones, right? So we have to have our most unique condition up here. Cool. Well, that is it for office hour. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to use the